Good morning, Sebastian Modak. Welcome on VH Berries.
Good morning. It's good to be here.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's a nice, cool summer day in New York City.
To travel is to live. This is a very popular quote. But with you, Sebastian, I would change it with to travel with cancelling, noise cancelling headphones is to live.
I do think it's a very important thing to pack with you. When you're taking as many flights as I do, and you have to deal with as many, loud talkers and screaming babies as I do on planes, sometimes these can help a lot.
Absolutely, because when I took a very deep look at your articles and works for many newspapers, you really put an emphasis on the technology that is surrounding traveling.
Yeah, I did spend some time, especially I spent a few years working at the magazine Condé Nast Traveler and just ended up doing a lot of tech coverage for them. So that is still part of what I do, although I don't do as much of it as I used to. But I'm still very interested in the technology we bring with us when we travel that makes it easier to travel or just more fun. Though I wouldn't say it's necessarily my main focus now.
As the date of today, you have many involvements in a lot of projects, and one is called Lonely Planet. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so Lonely Planet is primarily has been a guidebook company, almost 50 years old, started really with a certain kind of traveler in mind, that traveler who wants to get off the beaten path and meet locals and really entrench themselves in a new culture. It's been 50 long years, and I just joined over the past few months as an editor at large. So I've been kind of involved in thinking about how do you translate all that history, all that legacy, all that expertise in travel and guidebooks into the modern age, into digital technology, into the way that we all consume media now, which is mostly, staring at our phones or on computers. So, it's been very fun. It's a very exciting place to work right now. I think it's a lot of very talented people, a lot of very passionate travelers with a lot of big ideas about what the future of travel looks like. So I've been involved with that for about 3-4 months now.
This is very inspiring. And Sebastian Modak, you just mentioned the word digital side. That's right, because today you don't believe anymore that people are buying physical books and maps, to know where they are.
Yeah, no, I think it varies. I mean, I think there's a lot of people, especially with a brand like Lonely Planet, for example. There are people who are very nostalgic about having the guidebook, and you go to the cafe in Paris or wherever you are, and you sit down with your coffee and you read the guidebook and you say, okay, I'm going to go here, here, here. But I think especially younger audiences, they're not doing that as much anymore. They're looking at Instagram to find out where they should go, or they're, talking to their friends, or they're on Reddit or wherever, So I think it's not unique to what I'm doing now. It's not unique to Lonely Planet or the New York Times or anywhere else that I work with or have worked in the past. But everyone's trying to figure out, how do you tell travel stories for a new generation?
And through your career that has started quite a few times ago, I would say a few years ago, you started with the Washington Post, the New York Times. So you have jumped around various newspapers.
Yeah, no, I have. I mean, Washington Post, I was never an employee there. I've written as a freelance journalist. I've written articles for them. But my first kind of real full-time journalism job was with Condé Nast Traveler, the travel magazine. Before that, I was also involved in media, though it wasn't necessarily just travel writing. I was doing a lot of video stuff. I was very involved in music. I did a project in Botswana about hip-hop music in Botswana. I did a documentary series, or worked on a documentary series about music and protest around the world. And then I kind of transitioned into travel writing from there. So, like I said, I was at Condé Nast Traveler. And then from there, I was at the New York Times as their 52 places traveler for a year. And then since that project ended, just been freelancing. So writing for many different publications, like you said, the Washington Post, BBC, Outside Magazine, still with the New York Times as well. And now lately doing a lot more work with Lonely Planet. So that's kind of the trajectory of my storytelling career, per se.
By the way, with this trajectory, we just mentioned the number 52 countries. So this is the number of countries you have visited in the past?
No, I've visited many more. I visited probably close to 80 countries. The 52 was a franchise of the New York Times. It was something that they started where every year they released something called the 52 Places to Go. The idea being you could go to one place every week for a year and see the world that way. And then a few years ago, they started giving one person, the dream of a life, the job of a lifetime, to travel to each one of those 52 places. So they spent a week in each place. And I was the second person to have that job. So for all of 2019, I was spending 1 week in a different place around the world for the full year, and writing a column from each place and taking photographs, social media, just storytelling from 52 different places around the world. So that's the significance of the 52 number.
And what is very ironic, Sebastian Modak, is that this was all, as you mentioned, in 2019, which is 1 year before the pandemic. This is very ironic. And by the way, this is also the year in which I started podcasting. So a lot of things are linked.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was very lucky to have had the experience that I had, because I got back in December 2019. Exhausted, after the course of that year, I took 88 flights, traveled the equivalent of almost 5 times around the planet. So as you can imagine, I was very tired. I was ready for a break. But then, of course, a few months after I got back, the world changed forever. And my few months break turned into a much longer break from travel. So I was lucky to have had the experience I had just before everything happened.
And moreover, I truly believe that for you, the word freelance rhymes with freedom.
Sure, yeah. No, I think there's a lot to be said. Freelance writing is difficult. I think it's a hard life, because you have to constantly be trying to find the next story and pitching to editors and hoping that editors will reach out to you for stories. So it can be difficult. It can be exhausting, but I think like you said, the freedom of it is the reward for that work. The fact that you get to make your own hours, you get to travel when you want to. Every day it's up to you what you decide to do. So in that sense, yeah, I think there is some freedom to freelancing.
Absolutely. And concerning a few numbers of your articles, for example, one called The 10 Happiest Countries in the World, you are oftentimes working with other writers and journalists. For example, you did a collaboration with Caitlin Morton.
Oh yeah, you're looking very deep into the archives. That's something that I haven't even thought about for a while. I mean, yeah, that's from my days at Condé Nast. That was kind of the daily digital journalism life that we would put up these articles. And I think, I probably wrote the original version of that article, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, based on a ranking that would come out. And then I think the other name that you're seeing there are other people who have come in since to update it. I wouldn't be able to tell you much about what's going on with articles like that. Those are from a long, long time ago. And I think my focus has shifted from those kinds of articles to more feature, kind of more long form personal narratives is what I'm most interested in now.
Wow. And the interesting fact is that on an article, one of the most important thing is the title, and you're very surpassing yourself to be creative. For example, the joy of making new friends through Google Translate.
Yeah, that was oftentimes actually it's not even myself that comes up with the headlines, right? That was an editor that came up with the headlines. But that was a fun story. That was also for see that you've seen the Condé Nast Traveler articles that I've written. That one was, I believe, again, it was a little bit, at least a year ago or so, but it was for the print publication, the magazine side of it, and it was a story of meeting somebody in the country of Georgia and how we were able to communicate and sort of find some shared experience and shared senses of humor and everything else, just kind of pointing at things and using Google Translate and whatever else. It just shows that, I usually, a lot of people ask like, oh, you've been to all these places, how do you do it with language? If they don't speak English or you don't speak the local language. And I think with an article like that, the joy of making friends through Google Translate, I think, but the point I'm trying to make is that you actually can make connections without language. You can make long-lasting connections and friendships. It just takes a little bit of creativity, and maybe you have to embarrass yourself a little bit and put yourself out there. But I think that's one of the best parts of travel, personally.
So this related story was, if I remembered well, in Georgia, so near the Turkish border.
That's right. Yeah, I was in by the Black Sea, around there in Georgia. There's a little town called Batumi, and I started there. Not little town, city called Batumi, and went into the mountains with a guide who ended up becoming a friend.
And Sebastian Modak, when I'm hearing you, I can feel this passion when you are mentioning traveling. And this specific concept, as we just mentioned, has shifted through the last year. So as for today, what is your meaning of traveling?
Yeah, I think it's a very big question. What's the meaning of traveling? I think it depends on who you are, what your priorities are. I think what I hope has changed over the past year, when we've been stuck at home, we've had to cancel vacations and weddings and all kinds of plans that we might have had. It's been difficult for a lot of people, myself included. I mean, I went from constant travel to no travel, right? And I hope that it's put things into perspective. I hope it's made us realize how lucky we are to be able to travel at all. I hope it's going to make us travel with more intention and with more responsibility and with a greater understanding of the context in which we're traveling and the way that we're affecting local communities. And maybe it's time to skip that all-inclusive resort on the beach when you're not really interacting with the culture at all, and instead go into town, make some new friends, learn a new skill, put yourself out there. And I think the real value of travel is in the connections that we make with other people. And I hope that this past year, even as we've been isolated from each other, it's made us want to build those connections even more instead of hide even more into our own shells. So when things get back to normal, if they get back to normal, I hope it's not just the way it was. I hope it's a new normal, and I hope we approach travel with a new mindset.
And concerning this mindset when approaching travel, I also truly believe that this is very important to lose ourselves, if I can say this, when you are going to a country that we don't know, to really take the time, sit somewhere and just watch our environment, to be connected to our five senses.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's difficult too when you're someone who writes about travel, when you're a journalist, because especially with something like the New York Times 52 Places project, I was under so much pressure, right? Because I was in a different place every week, and I had to turn around a big story every week. So it felt like I always had to be working, and I always had to be documenting, and I had to be thinking about the story. It was hard to just slow down and be mindful of me being in the place as well as a traveler. So for me, it's important to do that. And I think I've done that I kind of have gone into the habit now that when I travel to a new place, especially if I'm alone, before I even start thinking about the story or interviewing people or taking photos or whatever else, I'll just go for one long walk. I'll just walk for maybe 1-2 hours, no destination in mind. Just go, just feel the city. Maybe sit down, have a coffee or a beer or something, and watch the city go by, and really just kind of center myself and be like, okay, I am here, and I am lucky to be here. And this is what it feels like to be here. And then I can start thinking about, okay, how do I turn this into a 2,000-word article or whatever.
By the way, we need to make a pause on this 52 countries project, because when I'm just thinking about it now, there is so many options and things that comes to my mind. For example, the way we dress, because every country doesn't have the same climate. And also, you just mentioned that it was really hectic, that you always sense the pressure to work and document what you were experimenting. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, no, it was a challenge. I think it was an amazing, on the part of the New York Times, I give all credit to them for coming up with this very out there idea, very ambitious experiment, and I'm very, very grateful. I can complain about the fact that I was so tired, and I took 88 flights, and I always, most of the time, in economy class, unless I was upgraded. It wasn't easy by any means, but I'm so lucky to have. I definitely recognize the privilege that I have of doing that, and I would never be caught actually complaining about it because I was so lucky. But yeah, it did pose its challenges. I mean, I had to, in the same suitcase, I had to pack for Siberia and Tahiti. It's a difficult, even technically, logistically, it's a difficult thing to do. But yeah, it was amazing. It was a once in a lifetime experience.
And in your luggage, I believe that there is no place to put too many souvenirs.
Oh, definitely not. Definitely not. Actually, instead, what I did was I got into the habit of, from each place that I was in over the course of that year, I sent a postcard back to my partner in New York. So she would get the postcard from me, and now we have, 52 postcards that are kind of act as their own souvenir from each place, and each one has a message that I sent home. So that was a kind of creative way to collect souvenirs without having to put anything in my already very full suitcase.
And Sebastian Modak, this passion for traveling has always been in you because, for example, you have a mother that was from Medellin, Colombia, and a father who was in India. So it was, since the beginning, a very cultural mix.
Yeah, that's right. And I, even on top of that, not only were my, parents from two very different parts of the world, but I also, because of my father's work, we moved every 4 or 5 years. So I grew up constantly moving. We were in Hong Kong and Australia and India, and Indonesia is where I went to high school. So I definitely was raised with this value put on curiosity and learning about the world and engaging with the world. And I don't think I ever, while it wasn't like intentional, it wasn't like from a young age, I was like, I'm going to be a travel writer. I never planned for it that way, but I think you're right that my upbringing had a lot to do with what I ended up doing for a living.
So you grew up moving from countries to countries. So Hong Kong, you just mentioned a few other ones. So you've always been like in a school that are related to America, because in every city, there is always, for example, the French high school, the American college, So
yeah, I mean, it changed a little bit. It was what they, international school. So it was some of the Americans, like kind of a mix sometimes of the American system and the, British system. But definitely a lot. Big American cultural influence on that school. I mean, that's why I talk like this and I have this accent, right? Because of the schools that I grew up in. So, yeah.
I don't recognize any accent. You just mentioned the American accent, right?
You don't think I have an American accent? This sounds like an American accent to me.
Oh, you have one. I just said you had one. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think I do. And I think it's, I'm an American citizen, but I only lived in the US for the first 2 years of my life. But I think in the international schools, you're consuming so much American pop culture, music and television and whatever else, and you end up talking like this.
And right now, you are in Brooklyn, New York City. So
that's right. Yeah, I've lived in New York on and off for 5-6 years, but previously my partner and I were living in Harlem, which is a neighborhood in kind of the top of Manhattan, Upper Manhattan. We just moved to Brooklyn about 2 months ago, so we're kind of new to the neighborhood.
That's inspiring. And Sebastian Modak, in the future, people need to know that you're going to publish a book.
I hope so. Yeah, that's the hope. I've been working on it for a long time already, and it's tough. You get distracted by day-to-day things. You get distracted by articles you need to pitch for and publish and all that stuff. So I've been working on it slowly, and I think it's hopefully whenever it's out there, it'll touch on a lot of the things we've been talking about how to travel with more intentionality and more consciousness, and hopefully contribute to like a larger conversation about how we can be more responsible travelers.
Absolutely, it will contribute to the conversation around travel. So this is what we can classify as a long-term project that you have developed since a long time. So can you tell us a little bit more about what's inside those lines?
I wish I could. I have to write it first. But no, we are, I'm at the stage where I'm still kind of planning it all out and thinking about it. I don't, it could lead to nothing. I don't have anything signed away. There's nothing set. It's very much little parts that I'm working on at once. But to tell you what's inside, I mean, the idea is using my experiences, not just, on the 52 Places project and all the other traveling I've done as an adult, but also growing up the way I did, and just looking at how it's affected the way I view the world and the way I view travel, and hopefully impart some lessons from that about how we can travel better, basically. Just, I think there's a lot of concerns right now around representation and the environment and how all these things intersect with travel. And I think hopefully, even if I don't have all the answers in a book form, hopefully whenever this project sees the light of day, it will offer some more questions and some more conversation points that will get things started. But like I said, there's no, publishing deal in place or anything. This is very much in the early stages still. So stay tuned. But in the meantime, there'll be plenty of other articles and other content that I'll be creating that people can read and consume.
That's deep, because you just mentioned that in, for example, the book, you will of course mention some type of sociology, because, for example, by traveling from Tahiti to another places, you can see the gap between the population, their way of life, and their wealth.
Sure, yeah, that is part of it, but it's not my place necessarily to make any judgments about that or make larger points about that, because I think another big point that I try to make in my writing is that such a big part of travel is humility, right? I think in the past, travel writers they'll go to a place and they'll say, I know everything about it, and here's what you need to know about the place. But what do I know about, Paris after spending a week there? Like, really, what do I mean, I'm still learning. I'm still new to it. So I'll never know as much as a local. I'll never be able to know that. So I think it's important to acknowledge that and instead offer stories that can maybe, shed some light on humanity at large and the world at large and our place in it and everything, without just saying like, here's everything you need to know about Paris because I'm an expert because I spent 1 week there. And I think that's not the approach that we need to be taking. I think it's been the approach that we've taken for a long time, and I think hopefully it's time to change that a little bit.
Absolutely, because let's say that I were going to travel with you for this long 52 countries trip. If the two of us were writing a book, the book will be totally different, two versions.
Absolutely, and I think that's what's great about travel, right? It's so subjective. It's so, it's why a lot of people ask me, they say, "Oh, you've been to this many countries, whatever. Like, what's your favorite place?" And I never give an answer for that because I think it's so subjective. It's so based on experience. How can you say that you rank the country of India number 4 in your places after spending a couple of weeks there? Like, who am I to make judgments like that? I think it's better to ask, what was some of your best experiences? What are some of your some stories from your travels that stuck with you versus saying what's the best place, what's the second best place, where should I go? Like you fall into trying to make absolute statements about something that, like you said, is so subjective. We could have the same exact trip and have very different opinions based on that trip.
So when someone, if I understood correctly, is asking you that, you're kind of refusing to giving them an answer. But when I'm looking at your articles, I also believe that you are sometimes forced to do some rankings because, as I mentioned earlier, with the top 10 of the happiest countries, and I saw some of others' rankings.
Yeah, but those are, again, from when I was doing more like daily reporting stuff, and I didn't come up with the rankings. That's me reporting on another list that already came out. So,
I see.
It might be like HSBC puts out a best places for expats or whatever, and then we will write about that list. So I never come up with the list myself. I would never say on my own, from my own experience, what country is happier than other. These are like, metrics and lists from the UN or other organizations that I have reported on in the past.
And it just reminded me or something concerning this long trip is that I believe that every destination have been organized very smart, in a very smart way, because you are always going to travel from the closest country to another one. You're not going to do big travels. For example, if you need to travel from Australia to Japan, you're not going to go to Los Angeles and then come back to Japan.
Well, you'd think, but we actually, for the most part, we tried to plan it, to make as much geographical sense as possible. Otherwise, I could have spent half the year on planes, but there were a few times because the 52 places list, it comes out, and sometimes there's a specific reason that a place is on the list. So maybe it's a solar eclipse in Chile, or there's a festival in Switzerland. So I had to be there at that time. So there were a few times where I had to kind of crisscross the world a little bit. But for the most part, we tried to make it as logical as possible, which in itself is kind of a fun puzzle,
And by the way, concerning this concept of traveling, what are your highest values?
Highest values? I mean, the things I value most are around connecting with people. It's connecting with people is what I value the most. It's, I've been very lucky. I've been to a lot of beautiful places. I've seen a lot of, wonders of the world and natural wonders, and whether it's waterfalls or the Taj Mahal or whatever. But when I think back to places, the first thing that comes to my mind aren't those landmarks. It's people. It's the people that I've met, the people who have welcomed me into their homes and shown me something about where they're from. And so for me, that's what I value most about travel, for sure.
And when you are doing this work abroad, you are, of course, taking notes because you are doing a written article, but do you also like to document what you are seeing in another way? And by saying that, I mean, for example, pictures with a camera to film and record.
Yeah, no, I have definitely. I mean, I definitely take notes, but actually, I think I rely on multimedia more than I do my own notes because I'm constantly, you know, a big part of my job is also I'm a photographer, and for the New York Times, I was taking all my own photos, which is rare in the journalism that we live in now. Usually, there's separate people who write and take their photos, and I was very lucky to be in a position where I could do both. So I was photographing everything along the way. Also, social media is a big part of my job. So I was constantly, updating Instagram stories and Twitter and all that stuff. So that was a way of documenting things too. And oftentimes when I was putting the story together, at the end of each trip, I would rely on looking back on that media, on the photos and recordings, audio recordings that I do and everything else. I would look back on that as a way to remind myself of details even more than reading my notes,
To be honest, Sebastian Modak, you really need to start podcasting with every human that you are meeting abroad. I'm trying to convince everybody around me to start a podcast.
Yeah, no, it's a good idea. Maybe that'll happen down the line. I think I've learned so much from people around the world, and I'm sure there is an appetite to hear those stories firsthand,
Of course, to hear their stories. Thank you so much, Sebastian Modak, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and good luck with all your future endeavors.